All right, I will call the meeting to order as Zachary Epps, co-chair of the Finance Committee. The voice you just heard was Daniel Schultz, sorry about that, also co-chair of the Finance Committee. This is my first committee of the Finance that I'll chair, and I will start with a roll call, starting with Daniel Schultz.
Daniel Schultz, present.
Leah Mulhern, present.
Caroline Watts, present.
Robin Murphy, present.
Mia Blitzstein, present.
Charles Burdell Williams, present.
Jennifer Lohman, present.
Ross Whiting, present.
Awesome, marvelous. I'd be remiss if I didn't say happy Black History Month to everyone. Black history is American history. It's our history. And I know there's a lot of programming going on. I think February 24th, the district has a showcase for Black History Month. So anybody in the community interested, talk to your principal or your teachers about that. I will wait a motion for approval of last meeting's minutes.
So move, Charles Burdell Williams.
Second, Mia Blitzstein.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. And with that, the minutes are approved, and I'll hand it over. All the participants can't see. We have a third co-chair for tonight, Lennox Epps, who's making a guest appearance. So
I did notice that. It's always good to have support in your first sharing experience.
yeah, we're family first, but it won't be too much of a distraction. I'll hand it over to administration for tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Zachary. Tonight on the agenda, we have
Josh, Mr. Swiss, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Are you able to make it full? We see like a preview screen and then the next slide. Are you able to make it so we, or at least that's what I see?
That's what I see as well.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes,
you.
perfect. Thank you. Apologies.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize if that's what you saw for the Finance Committee meeting. I thought you were seeing the full picture. All right. If everyone can see the agenda slide full screen, I'll get right to it. We have a lot to cover tonight. We have a guest presentation tonight as well. So tonight we're going to take a look at our interim financial information through January of 2026 and see how our operating results have worked out so far throughout the year. We're going to take a look with our independent auditor, the audited financial results for our 23-24 audit report. We will take a look at historical financial results from that audit report through 26-27 school year to catch up to the 26-27 preliminary budget, which we will review at a high level. And then last, we'll look at some board action items for approval at the next legislative meeting. So I'm actually going to unshare, and I'm going to turn it over to Carl Hogan, who is here from CliftonLarsonAllen. Did I pronounce that right, Carl?
Yes, CliftonLarsonAllen.
Allen. Do you need to share your screen at all, Carl?
Yeah, that would be great. I just have a couple of slides from the pieces from the audit report just to kind of go over tonight.
All right, to introduce Carl, Carl was lead auditor with CliftonLarsonAllen, who audited our financial statements for the 23-24 school year and author of the report that was shared last month. And he is here to present and answer any questions on that audit report.
Yeah.
So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Carl.
Yep, thanks. I'll share my screen here in a second, but first, be remiss not to, sincerely apologize for the lateness of the report. I'm sure Josh has shared with everybody. Went from a small regional firm who was merged in with another national firm, who then turned around and sold me to another national firm. So it's been quite the whirlwind for me, and it's caused great disruptions with my clients and being able to provide them with what they need so they can meet their reporting requirements. But I just first thought I'd get that out of the way. I just didn't want it to be any kind of reflection on management for the late audit report. Just want to make sure that any kind of blame or any kind of problems or that may have arisen because of the late audit report solely falls on my group and the transitions that were not my decisions, but that they were put on me. So hopefully, as I move forward here with CliftonLarsonAllen, I could get some consistency moving into these next into my next cycle of audits as we move forward here. But before I went into the results, I just want to throw that out there to make sure that any kind of blame that needs to be solely rides on my team's shoulders. So that being said, I just picked out a couple. I mean, this is June 30th, 2024. The audit is meant to be a historical document, not this historical, but I thought I'd just pick out a couple slides here just to kind of go over the main things that I would go over. I'm not going to go in that much detail. You're already through 2024, 25, halfway through 25, 26. And this is 23, 24, but got to do my due diligence in terms of reporting to the board the results for the year ended 2023, 2024. So I just picked out a couple pages here. The audited financial statements, June 30th, 2024. We have an unmodified, clean audit opinion consistent with what was being reported to you during 2023, 2024. There's no modifications to this audit report. We call it an unmodified audit report. As we come down here below, there's no changes in the audit report. I just want to point out required supplementary information. Some of the most important stuff, we'll touch base on it here. Management's discussion and analysis. There's some good information here, even though it's 23, 24. It also gives management the ability to talk about what's happened since 23, 24, what's going to happen into the future. So I think it's still a good piece of information for everybody to read, especially that part at the end called the factors bearing on the district's future, and then the budgetary comparison schedule for the general fund. And we're going to talk about that and how that kind of impacts and what that's kind of look like as you move forward when you look at your 24, 25 results, and then 25, 26, and as you plan for 26, 27. And then down below here, this last part of the audit report, in addition to giving an opinion on your financial statements, we're also giving an opinion on what we call supplementary information, the most important of which is your schedule of expenditures of the federal awards. The school district does receive a substantial amount of federal awards. It may be your smallest revenue stream, but it may be the most time we spend on any of your revenue streams just because of the compliance requirements that are given to us by the federal government. Happy that this is primarily the last year that we're going to have to audit the ESSER funding, and you're going to get more of a traditional cycle where we're going to be auditing Title I, Child Nutrition, IDEA programs moving forward as your major programs. And we'll go over those results as a part of this audit presentation as well. So first page I have here is what I just alluded to, the budgetary comparison schedule for the general fund. As you're going to see here, total budget, $130 million, $132 million budgeted when changes taken into account for federal revenues. Your actual revenues came in at $138 million, of which you have a positive variance of $5.6 million. Of which local source revenues made up a positive variance of $4 million, and then you have your state source revenues that made up a variance of $1.2 million. Just as in previous years, your local source revenues were amounts that were received outpaced budgeted amounts, and that's a lot of that one-time revenue, investment earnings, earned income taxes, not so much transfer taxes in the year that we're looking here. But what I do want to kind of stress here is those revenues that we talked about in the most recent years that were better than anticipated, they are slowing down. I anticipate they'll continue to slow down through 24, 25, and you got to continue to be conservative when budgeting your local source revenues as you go into the 26, 27 budget. For the current year, most of the better than anticipated local source revenues are primarily in earnings on investments. It's hard to budget when you don't know what that federal funds rate is going to look like. A lot of talk that's going to go down, but it hasn't gone down as much as you would anticipated. But also your earned income taxes continue to outpace budgeted amounts that are received from your third party provider. Once again, state source revenues were better than anticipated. A lot of this has to do with the state appropriation and when you're receiving that and what the final budget is. You're typically at this point, especially this past year, but passing your budget way before the state passes their budget. So a lot of that better than anticipated state source revenue is related to your basic and special ed monies that came in better than it or budgeted higher by the state than originally anticipated when they finally passed their budget in July in this case here, July of 2025, or this case here, that would have been June or July of 2023. Yeah, my year's confused here. As we come down to your expenditures, you're going to see you have better than anticipated expenditures here within your instruction. But overall, you're going to have some ups, you have some downs in any given year. And overall, your total expenditures were about $800,000 better than anticipated. This kind of, should be expected. You know what your expenditures are going to be on an annual basis. And you know what your salaries are going to be, you know what your employee benefits are generally going to be. So typically when we get to this bottom line here, total expenditures, even though some line items are higher, some are lower, you're typically in the range what you think your total expenditures are going to be on an annual basis. So overall, when we take your revenues over your expenditures, your excess of revenues over expenditures was $6.4 million. As a result, you were able to make a transfer out to your capital funds of that excess revenues. Most of that related to one-time revenues, and this is going to be considered a one-time transfer out for capital projects expenditures. Kind of what you want to do. You don't want to rely on those revenues to continue to fund continuing operations when it's only one-time revenues. So it's a good move to, just like you have in previous year, to transfer that money over to the capital, which is for one-time expenditures. When we take in that to account, your net change in your fund balance is $1.5 million. Fund balance at the beginning of the year was $26.6 million. Add $1.5 million. Fund balance at the end of the year is $28.2 million. And we'll go over the specifics or the components of what your fund balance looks at in relation to committed, assigned, non-spendable, and your unassigned fund balance as of June 30th, 2024. Here's the same information that we looked at without the budget information, but I also wanted to point out that the school district also has a capital projects fund. Within the capital projects fund is a capital reserve fund and a capital construction fund. The capital reserve fund consists of transfers over from the general fund, while the capital construction fund consists of bond issuance costs. The case here, the school district had local source revenues in that fund of about $400,000, which is all investment earnings. During the current year, was kind of quiet in terms of current year expenditures, but they totaled $4.3 million. Some of the biggest expenditures or the biggest project that was going on during the current year was an alarm system plus the Cedar Brook project as well. So as you come down, you were able to transfer over money from the general fund, almost equivalent of what your expenditures were for the current year, which kind of offset, what those planned capital expenditures were for 2024 or 2023, 2024. So overall, when you take those all into account, your net change in fund balance for the capital projects fund was $710,000. And you were able to keep your fund balance consistent in this fund. It was $22.2 million at the end of the previous year, and then was upticked here, $22.9 million. School district has a nice capital fund set up for any kind of one-time expenditures that you don't necessarily have to go out and borrow money for, and any kind of like smaller projects that you may have, and that's a good safety net that the school district has for those type of expenditures. Here's your balance sheet, general fund, capital projects fund. I'm going to focus on that fund balance amount that we just talked about down below. I'll start with capital projects. Those monies are restricted for future capital projects by law, capital reserve by the state statute for capital reserve funds, and then the bond covenants related to the bond issuance costs. The fund balance for the general fund, as you can see there, it was $28.2 million. And this is nothing more than the excess of your current assets over your current liabilities at year end as of June 30th. And as you can see, most of your assets up here at the top consist of liquid cash and investments. So in the case of the school district, they had fund balance in excess of the 8% allowed by PDE. So what needs to happen is fund balance needs to be committed or assigned for one-time non-recurring expenditures. In the case of the school district, they've assigned fund balance for capital projects of $15 million, and then also strategic academic planning of about $1.9 million for future initiatives. Now, the reasoning behind keeping the assigned capital projects separate from the capital reserve fund is that the capital reserve fund is very restrictive. Once you move money over to the capital reserve fund, it can't be moved back. There's actually, when Josh and his team does the annual financial report with PDE, it won't allow, once you move that money over, it won't allow you to move it back. So the idea here is to keep it within the general fund. And if there's a situation where you dip below that 8% or these monies need to be used for other one-time non-recurring expenditures, you could change that assignment. Whereas if you move the money over to the capital reserve fund, it can't come back. So even though the school district has an extensive capital improvement program that it's currently has, this allows it some flexibility here without actually moving over to the capital reserve fund until it's needed. And then finally, the summary of the auditor results. So we talked about what kind of audit opinion you had. We talked about the financial results of the school district, and then also this is the summary of the auditor's results. There was no, in the audit of the financial statements, there's nothing what we consider a material weakness or significant deficiency. There are matters that we do discuss with management regarding recommendations to improve on its financial reporting, etc. But nothing that would rise to the level that would need to be reported in a public forum and considered a material weakness or significant deficiency. Same thing with the non-compliance. Nothing we consider materials of the financial statements. And then down below, the results of the federal awards. During the current year, we had to test 3 different programs during the current year. The first being the Education Stabilization Fund. Like I said, this will be probably the last year that we test this. Title I, and then also the Special Education Cluster or the IDEA funds during the current year. The dollar threshold for the major program is $750,000. This is going to increase past the 24-25 year to $1 million, which will probably help us out in terms too of the number of major federal programs we're going to need to test. And that is the total results of the audit. I'm going to kind of open it up to everybody. I think as the finance committee and as you have over the past couple of years, just having these positive financial results makes your job a lot easier, provides you some flexibility as you go into each of your budget seasons moving forward.
Thank you, Carl Hogan. I'll open it up to members of the board. All right, seeing no hands at the moment. Could you add a sentence around the 8% requirement? Like what is that around the fund balance? Like 8% of what?
Yeah, so there's something called unassigned fund balance, and the Pennsylvania Department of Education says they're going to look at your next year's expenditure budget, and you can't have more than 8% unassigned fund balance. So what you need to do is anything over that 8%, you need to assign or commit. So that's why the school district's assigned fund balance for capital projects and for the strategic initiative.
8% of the total budget.
8% of the total expenditure
okay,
budget
got
next
it.
year. Yep. So that came out to whatever that was.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. All right.
And in any case, in any school district, I would think that there's more than enough to justify capital expenditures at any school district because everybody needs extra money for capital.
And then I do appreciate you started off the presentation around the timing. This is 23-24. And so for 24-25, do you anticipate some of the same challenges or?
No, I'm going to communicate with Josh here. We're going to be starting here within the next 2 to 3 weeks and try to get this done within the next 1 to 2 months so we could get me and my team back on the right track in terms of it's just been a lot of bouncing around.
Sounds like a whirlwind as a small business owner. Doesn't sound easy. So definitely have some empathy for you there and appreciation. All right. Not to belabor the topic and don't want to hold you any longer than we have to, Mr. Hogan, if you don't have any further questions, we can move forward to our next part of the agenda. Thank you very much for your diligence.
Thank you, Carl.
Back over to you, John.
All right. Does everyone see the agenda again?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. All right. I'll start off. Let's take a look at our interim financial statements through the month of January 2026. Most notably, looking at our cash position, cash year over year is down. We talked about this in prior months. A lot of that money that Carl just talked about that we transfer over to the cap reserve fund actually sits in the general fund as an IOU, and we earn interest on it until it comes time to actually transfer the money and expend the funds. So a lot of that money was sitting in this interfund payables until it was eventually transferred over to the capital projects fund. So we have a decrease in our liability and a decrease in our cash as a result. And those funds are being moved to, in essence, fund the stadium project, and the stadium project is being primarily financed out of that capital reserve fund without having to incur debt or pay interest. Moving down to revenue and expenditures in these two categories, you can see year over year, our revenue collection has sped up versus the prior year, and our expenditures are relatively on track, all things considered, versus the prior year. And we'll look at that in detail on the next slide. Increases in local source revenue are driven by interest income. They're driven by real estate tax collection and the timing of that collection. Our state source revenue is driven by a more expedient collection than the prior year due to the timing of the passage of the state budget. All in all, our timing year over year, $120 million of revenue collected through January of 2026 versus $113 million collected in January 2025, or a $7 million increase. I don't anticipate that to hold throughout the rest of the year. I think we'll see those revenue levels level off. Down on the expenditure side, year to date, when we talked about the 25-26 budget, it was always a discussion of salaries and benefits. Most of that is captured here in our teacher salaries, which is our teachers and our support staff salaries, which is the vast majority of our budget. And those increases are reflected here through half of the year. The only other outlying expense is the facilities expense, and that is $1.3 million spent on the Cheltenham roof. We did receive $900,000 of that grant as revenue in January, so that's reflected in this $14 million number up here. So it's mostly a wash at this point. Looking year over year, obviously we have $48 million of expenditures. I'm sorry, $72 million of expenditures in 2026 versus $69 million in the prior year. or year over year, our current change in fund balance is $48 million to the positive versus $43 million to the positive. So we're trending in the right direction so far. Moving on to our graph of structural stability. Obviously, we're holding this gap through the end of the school year, and maintaining this gap is the graphical illustration of our structural stability. So far, projecting this out has us maintaining that stability. And the last slide with our interim financial information is a look at some of our local taxes and our local revenue collection. Real estate tax collection, we're right at the end of our real estate tax collection cycle, and our total collections to date have been $96.3 million versus $94 million over the prior year, with a 3% tax increase. So our collections weren't quite as strong as we were anticipating or hoping, and there's a number of factors. We'll talk about that later in the presentation and in the budget presentation. Our earned income taxes are still strong. Our delinquent real estate taxes have increased over the prior year, and our earnings on investments still remain strong year over year. Interest rates, investment return hasn't moved significantly since the prior year, and because of some of those prior year surpluses, we've held and maintained a higher cash balance, which has allowed us to earn more interest. Before I move on to the next topic, any questions on the interim financial information?
Looks like we're good to move forward. Although we do have a question in the chat from a community member around with whom can I have a conversation regarding our finances. This is our finance committee. So if you got kicked off in between meetings, we shifted from facilities to finance committee. So this is our official finance committee meeting. And so if there are questions you have related to what we're talking about, now would be the perfect time to ask them. And if there are questions that you have broadly around finances, I think you could probably send one email that has all of your questions over to the superintendent and others that information was shared earlier. If that doesn't satisfy your question, please do just let us know. But Josh, I'll hand it back over to you.
Absolutely. You can email myself, jsweigard@cheltenham.org, or if it goes to Dr. Thriven, it'll end up in my email as well. All right, we covered the audit already with Carl. Moving on to the budget process. So obviously following the Act 1 timeline, we look at this schedule every month, and here we are in February, and we're taking a look at our preliminary budget at the Finance Committee. So going back to Carl's audit report showing a net change in fund balance of 1.5 million, revenues of 138,000 in our general fund, expenditures of 136,000, and change in fund balance of 1.5 million. We need to bridge the gap from that audit report to our current year budget. So here I have the financial information that was reported to the Department of Education in our annual financial report. For the year ended June 30th, 2025, we were looking at total revenues of 139, almost 140 million, versus expenditures of 139.8 million. And a little bit more of a collapse of our structural balance. You can see here at the end of the year, we only had 1.5 million to transfer over to the Capital Reserve Fund as a result of last year. And going into 2026, we'll continue to see this trend of our structural stability becoming a little tighter and tighter. And that's somewhat planned. Obviously, we don't need a large surplus in our general fund. We're in essence a nonprofit, and we're trying to break even to the greatest extent possible. But sometimes we do receive one-time revenues that push us above that threshold. So a very early projection for this year, for the year ended June 30th, 2026. A lot of this I'm still holding very close to budget, projecting total revenue of $141.8 million and total expenditures of 141.9, almost $142 million, or a very slight loss or break even number. Any questions on the interim and projected financial information? All right, so carrying us into the 2026-2027 school year, so next fiscal school year. Last year, we set a budget of $140.2 million, revenue and expenditures, a balanced budget. This year, we'll look at this in some more depth in some future slides. This year, with currently no tax increase built into our existing structure, we are looking at total revenues of approximately my computer's very touchy, $140 million, with a $5.8 million dip into our fund balance to balance the budget. And we're looking at total expenditures of $146.7 million for our preliminary 26-27 budget. There's still a lot of work to do to get to our final proposed budget that will be released in several months. But by first calculation, this is where I'm coming up in terms of in total expenditures. So what this means is we have a $5.8 million gap to fill somewhere along the line between now and the end of the school year, or we have to consider dipping into our fund balance to balance the budget. So I broke this out in two parts. We'll look at revenues. We'll look at how we got from a budget of $140 million to $140 million in revenue to $141 million in revenue, and how we got to a budget of $140 million in expenditures and $146 million in total expenditures. All right, so on the next slide, we started out with a budget for the 25-26 school year of $140 million. Without raising taxes, our current real estate tax revenue is projected to decrease by approximately $1.6 million. And that is due to the change in this real estate tax assessment and the common level ratio at the state, which drives real estate tax value across Montgomery County. It ebbs and flows, and this unfortunately is a series of years in which it is moving in a positive direction. So we have a number of tax appeals from our largest commercial taxpayers. Looking on the state side, we already know that we have additional Ready to Learn block grant money coming in, and we already know that we have some additional PSERS money that matches the amount of retirement money we're going to spend. And I did budget in a little bit of special education subsidy and basic ed subsidy monies as well, because I want to try and create an accurate picture as we go towards the proposed final budget. And of course, here we have our $5.8 million fund balance plug to get us to our total revenue of $146.7 million to balance the budget. Further notes that I already described, there were no tax increases in that real estate tax number that was presented. Assessment decreases are heavily impacting our real estate tax revenues. We have an anticipated drop in investment earnings. As you know, currently the existing Fed chair's term has expired, and we will have a new Fed chair taking place. Some of the interest earnings that we have received in the past, there is a lot of question marks around what that will look like in the future, especially with the new regime that heads the Federal Reserve, which sets the bank prime reserve rate, which drives our interest earnings directly. And the budget shortfall of $5.8 million represents roughly a 6.47% tax increase if we're all funded by taxes. But as you know, our Act 1 tax limit is 3.5%. So in essence, as it currently stands, we're looking at fund balance to balance the budget. A graphical representation of where our revenue comes from. The blue obviously represents local taxes and interest earnings, which is the vast majority of how Cheltenham School District is funded. Of this blue pie, 88% of it is real estate taxes. So Cheltenham School District, more than most surrounding districts, is heavily funded by real estate taxes and local with not much of an industrial tax base in support. The red represents all the money we get from the state, our basic ed subsidy, our retirement reimbursement, our social security reimbursement, and homestead, farmstead money, and the like. The 1%, this tiny orange sliver, that's the amount of federal revenue we get. So we get a very, we are now down to a very small amount of general fund revenue, which consists just of Title I and medical access funds at this point. And the green represents 4%. That's the fund balance plug to balance the budget. So we talked about the common level ratio and real estate tax assessments. So most counties in the state reassessed had a countywide reassessment at different times. I believe Montgomery County's was in the late 90s. So in order to turn the real estate tax assessment into an approximate fair value for sake of taxation and valuation, the state has a state tax equalization board, which sets a common level ratio, which is a formula which helps convert assessments into fair values. And that formula changes, and that formula drives assessment in large parts. The assessment moves up and down. Our goal is to try and budget on a very level foothold so that we don't eat into these ebbs and flows. And currently we're in somewhat of a down period, which is really driving our decline in real estate taxes. And I believe that is the last slide for revenue. So any questions on budget revenues before I move on to future slides?
Quick question, and I think you kind of just answered it, that like this, what we're looking at now could sort of be a leveling off more so than it is like a significant just drop. Is that kind of what we're hearing?
Yeah, I'm going to draw a red squiggly in the white space below it. I think this is a roller coaster type deal, meaning we're in this cycle, and then the cycle will move back in our favor, and then back again. And of course, this has played out. This last cycle was, a much bigger hump going into this, which, obviously anytime the step value is moving in this direction, it's in the favor of the school district. So, real estate tax values have increased significantly over the past couple of years, and this step value reflects that. So I think you'll continue to see this rolling cycle with this big hump from the last year. Now, obviously, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where real estate housing prices are headed, but for now, it being in a large metropolitan area, they're typically very stable. Any more questions on revenues? All right, if not, we'll do the same exercise on our expenditures. So we started with a budget of 140 million, and we ended with a budget of 146.7 million. And the biggest factors driving that increase are wages and benefits, with the largest, we've talked about this in prior meetings, being our health insurance premium increase of 22%, which is roughly a $2 million increase. And that is a big number, and included in this $4 million. So we're still looking at ways to mitigate that increase. It may require some forgiveness and some board action from our local health insurance collective and trust. But right now, that's the biggest expenditure that's driving our budget, is that health insurance increase. And that's just due to a very poor claims year. We're a self-insured entity in a pool with a lot of other self-insured school districts, and our premiums are almost directly driven by our claim expense over the recent history. But this also points out, what's really driving our budget. So almost 70% of our entire expenditures are salaries and wages and benefits. So when we talk about how we improve our structural stability, it is about making sure that our wages are fair and in line with the district's ability to pay for them, and making sure our benefits are the same as well. The next largest expense are special education services and tuitions. We had some significant growth in the past couple of years in terms of outside placements and special ed student count, and that is in turn driving our special ed tuition costs to private entities. Our transportation costs are expected to grow by $300,000. This is a relatively modest increase. We have a very favorable compared to our neighbors' transportation contract. I think we have some opportunities in there to reduce levels of service as well for underutilized services, and hopefully pull this number down some more with some work with our transportation director. And we talked about the Glenside and Cedarbrook project. We have some of that debt service phasing in next year to the tune of $720,000. I include the next biggest expenditure was Eastern tuition, and then kind of everything else lumped into one pot at $378,000. Any questions before I move on to the next slide? All right, if there are none, this is the graphical representation of what I just mentioned. We have 67% of the entire district's budget is staffing, is employees and employee benefits. 8% is our debt service. 8% is a relatively below average number for the Delaware Valley area, Delaware Valley school districts. Other contracted services makes up our student transportation contract. It makes up our tuitions to outside organizations, whether it's special ed or IU placed students, and other professional services. Those are primarily IU related services for special ed students. And that's what makes up all of these various categories in a high level summary. Some things to note on the expenditure side. The salaries and benefits are projected on existing staffing levels. So if we're looking at trying to find ways to reduce school district costs, we need to take a very heavy look on our staff student ratios and hone in very specifically on where those ratios are too high and where we can find potential savings. You know, we're looking at attrition. We are looking at finding ways to better utilize existing staff so we can reduce that number as much as possible. We talked about our health insurance premium increase of 22%. There was one positive note in last year. Our school district retirement rate went from 34% down to 33.5%. So there was $200,000 of cost mitigation as a result of that change. That's the first time it decreased in 26 years. So something to celebrate. We talked about transportation. This chart represents the last 10 years of some of our largest expenditures and some of those that are experiencing the most significant growth. I love charts. I love graphs. I think they put together a very good picture of what's happening in the school district world. So starting at the top, this PSERS rate is driven directly by the state and by our staffing levels. And you can see it is our biggest expenditure behind staff directly. The next cost has moved itself into the second position, and that is the healthcare cost. We had a 1% increase, which left it stagnant last year, and now we're looking at a 22% increase. So we're seeing one of the biggest jumps in recent history. Our debt service, which has been flat for the past 5 years, now we're undertaking a new project, replacing some of our oldest facilities, and that is increasing. Here, still not quite as fast as health insurance. Transportation is somewhat stable with our modest increases per year. And the one item to point out in this graph is our special education costs are growing at the fastest rate of all our expenditures right now. And charter schools, which were a big topic around COVID, around this time, because of some of the recent funding changes as it relates to cyber schools, that has helped keep our expenditures very flat. So we are grateful to receive that relief on that side. But the takeaway from this graph is here we have one of our fastest growing expenditures and is somewhat unpredictable is our special ed cost. So I wanted to overlay what medical cost trends are in the industry with what the school district is experiencing. So our actuarial, Conrad Siegel, to put together a medical cost trend chart that goes way too far back in time to 2008. But looking here at the current years, in 2021, we were averaging 6-7%. COVID hit, health insurance premiums dropped to 5.5%, and now we're leveling off at 8%. 2023, we were higher than average. 2024, we were right at average. 2025, we were below 8%. 2026, we were down at 1%. And then this year, obviously, if I'm connecting the dots, we're off the charts. So in terms of trying to meet this 8%, we are out of sorts. So I think over time this will straighten itself out, but for now we have to get through the 26-27 school year, and we have to figure out how we're going to make this work. And that's my last expenditure slide. So any questions before I move on to the next slide?
I actually,
Ms. Sloman.
thank you. Just a question about the special ed expenditures. Is that solely for, you said for tuition, out of district tuition, and or placement in IU run, classroom or something like that? It's not for like additional staff within the district?
So the primary driver is, and we talked about this in some prior meetings, it is private institution placement.
Okay.
And the reason, there's a couple of things driving that. One is the amount of space at approved private schools where the state and the school district split the tuition, the number of seats has not grown enough to meet the capacity that's occurring at all surrounding school districts. So more and more students are ending up in private placements, which mean full tuition cost for the school district. On top of that, the cost of employment and the cost of paraeducators has grown through the roof, significantly more than what our Act 1 index is of 3%. And that's also been reflected on the special ed schools who hire those types of employees. So a lot of those costs are having to be shifted and sheltered on the school districts to maintain staff and to maintain services for special ed students. So those combinations are shifting a lot more cost on the school districts, a lot less cost on the state. And that's kind of been a trend, the past couple of years. A lot more of the taxing burden has been shifted to local school districts to make more and more difficult decisions.
Thank you.
Dr. Whiting and then Mr. Schultz. Oh, did you want to?
Yes. Sorry. Again, didn't find the mute button. Okay. I just want to check for understanding, make sure I'm getting what we are discussing, essentially making the explicit here. There is essentially a $6 million, we have a $6 million gap in revenue and expenditure for our budget for the next year. And so we're going to have to make that up in several different ways. We can make it up via taxes. We can make it up via reducing expenses. Are there other possible? Are we considering using some of the residual funds from prior years in general fund to make up that deficit as well, or are we going to use a combination of those things? What are your thoughts on that, Mr. Sweigard?
I think we're looking at all of the above. I think everything is on the table. We're looking at expenditure reduction. We are looking at taxation. We are looking at potentially using some fund balance, whatever it's going to take to make it work.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Schultz.
Thank you. I also want to just make sure I am understanding essentially what has changed in our revenues. I understand the expenditures pretty clearly. The biggest, I'll call it quote unquote, unexpected expenditure increase is related to the medical expenses, which that is just going to happen, and we have to be able to react. But the revenues, I just want to make sure I grok it. So we have a sizable amount of local income from interest this year, and we are being conservative and expecting that to go away, which makes sense. And that's to the tune of $1 to $2 million roughly, in that range. Um, is that reflected where in the slide here? Where would is that reflected somewhere?
So we anticipated that drop to occur last year, if you remember.
Right.
And
Okay.
we dropped our interest revenue by $1 million last year. So I'm holding that number steady because we didn't experience those drops this year.
Yep.
So, yeah, I believe the total budget is $1.7 million for interest income, and we're looking right around $3 million for interest income this year.
Okay.
So not a total wipe away, but a decrease.
Yep. And the real estate tax. So the big thing here is the decrease to real estate taxes related to assessments.
That is correct.
That is correct. And that is $1.6 million of decrease.
That is correct. Yep.
And separately, that's something to continue to process. So just to be very clear, between those two numbers, between the medical expenses and that's like in itself a $3.5 million swing. And that is on top of planned expenditure increases through contractual increases. So we have kind of our plan, which would have been, right now the budget shortfall is 5.8, assuming no revenue increases. That we would have a budget shortfall if there was no tax increase, for sure. That's not surprising. And the amount would be, instead of 5.8, if it weren't for those two factors I just listed, that amount would be closer to 2.2, which is in the realm of what we essentially had been planning for. Is that all fair to say?
Yes, that is correct.
So that really helps me understand. Like that's why we're looking at a budget shortfall of 5.8, which is a very large number. When I would say towards the end of the last fiscal year, we were saying, yep, we're going to need to increase taxes, but it won't be, I think at that point we weren't even necessarily anticipating needing to come up to Act 1 index. I will just voice as one board member, obviously it is not sustainable to pay for, balance a budget using cash, using capital reserves. And I think, obviously, Mr. Sweigard, you know that. And I think many of our board knows that, but I just wanted to say it on public record that I am hoping that we will, if we have to do that as a one-time this year, it is done with anticipation of that's not going to be able to be a recurring tactic. And we would have to just have a multi-year plan to right-size that ship. But I know we're at the beginning of the conversations. So
in essence, whatever shortfall we have this year, we have to make up in a future year. So it's
right.
Kicking the can down the road and not necessarily resolving the issue.
Yep.
I don't know how far down the weeds we want to go on the health insurance issue, but like I said, it's based on our claims experience.
Right.
And we have a stop loss policy which caps the amount we can pay per claim, and we get everything over and above that amount, and we put it back into the trust. But the archaic formula, in my mind, is somewhat archaic. Doesn't take that into the account to the level it needs to, in my opinion. So I think we have to maintain a certain level of fund balance at CPAS. I think that they'll work with us. They'll allow us, knowing that that we had a very bad year last year, to kind of dip into that fund balance to go below the recommended level, and then keep monitoring it to make sure it's working itself to where it needs to be. So that's the current strategy, to try and reduce that health insurance premium.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other board member questions or comments? Mr. Schultz, I think your comment is apropos as we get to a couple other slides in terms of the use of fund balance. So thanks for sharing. I think hand it back over to you, Josh.
All right, so yeah, Ross, you put it succinctly. We have a $5.8 million deficit to sort out. And we have a limit on our Act One of 3.5%. And that limit is largely because we're receiving tax equity money at the state level, which prohibits us from increasing our Act One index above that 3.5%. So looking into the future, the Independent Fiscal Office at the state released its forecasted Act One index going into the future. So we're looking at base indices of, oops, I just crossed it out, 3.2% to 3.1% over the next 4 years. So these are the boundaries in which we have to work in. These are the boundaries in which we have to make sure all of our contractual obligations looking forward have to stay within these boundaries as well. And that's our work as administration. And that's our work as a board, whether it's through the negotiation process or anything else the board is involved in. That's our work in the next 5 years.
Mr. Schultz.
Thank you. I do just want to add, especially for members of the public who are listening to this, at least personally, and I think I speak for most of the folks, if not all the folks on this call, that it's not just the Act One index that is limiting our ability to raise taxes. It's a recognition of the burden that tax increases place on our constituents. And so seeing a number that is going to force us to plan for larger tax increases than I personally would prefer to see, regardless of Act One, even the levels of Act One, I think that really puts pressure on us as a board and this district to identify creative ways to, through maybe hard negotiation, but also through serious looks at how we are allocating our resources over the next year or two. Thinking about attrition when we see who's retiring, thinking about structural changes we can make to be more efficient. I know we've been continuously doing this, but I just feel it's important to have that be part of today's narrative, because this presentation reflects the beginning of some pretty hard looks at how are we going to get to next year at this time without having to either be looking at a structural deficit or also looking at continuing to tax a highly taxed community.
Any other questions on the Act index?
Sorry. Good.
And for those that
Yeah, Mr. Burdell, I wasn't sure if that was a hand up or your hand was cut off there, but go ahead.
Yep, no, it totally was. I'm functioning Zoom on my mobile device. It's a little bit harder to get to the raise hand function than I wanted it to. So thank you for acknowledging. Mr. Schultz, thank you for helping to frame that for this board, but also for the community and folks listening, because I wouldn't want to add there, but want to bring my focus more to, and this is just a comment, not a question, to the slide that we're looking at now related to Act One, recognizing that the ceiling or Act One index for next year's budget cycle is not actually higher. It is actually lower, which may mean if the continued rate of our budget deficit continues, that potentially more challenging. I know the difference between 3.5 and 3.2 doesn't look massive on paper, but as it comes to our budget, it will be important for the board and the community to also recognize that, because Mr. Sweigard and feel free to add any additional context, but that then makes our ability to go above more of something that we would potentially have to consider from an actionable standpoint, if in fact some of the things that we're talking about in terms of controllable expenses, aren't necessarily focused. So that was just more of a comment considering the trend in Act 1 index over the last few years had been trending in the different direction. The conversation now is going to be still slightly different, anticipating the continued decline in revenue income.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. I keep speaking about this as an accountant and not trying to miss the community focus and the impact it does have.
Oh, no problem.
All right, was there other questions on Act 1? Included in this presentation, I put in some historical information about the school district's revenues and expenditures going back to the 22-23 school year. And this is relevant because this is really the first year we came out of COVID and we operated on a somewhat normal basis, and included that and tried to project this out. Again, looking at very minimal increases going forward, what expenditures are growing, and where does the school district have to focus its attention to address those expenditure increases.
As one board member, I appreciate the projections. I know often I appreciate the projections, especially to the comments that were made a little earlier around the impact of using a fund balance from year to year. We actually see here that's not even practical, and so I appreciate this slide for multiple reasons.
It is difficult. I mean, if you have 1 year expenditures, you can build in your fund balance to cover. If you have a plan to kind of curb some identified expenditures going into the future, you can also build in some fund balance so you can phase it in and phase it out. And I think that will be our recommended look forward.
Actually, I did have a question. The state sources, is the assumption that it's like the 1.1, I didn't do the math, but is like 1.1 million each year, which is like the tax equity supplement? Is that the assumption there?
Roughly, it's a somewhat conservative, but I don't want to be completely unrealistic about what the state is going to contribute going forward. The federal government really doesn't provide much in the way of increases year over year, or at least they haven't in recent memory. Any other questions on the budget? All right, seeing none, I'll move on to board action items. Board action items for next week include, with the passage of the budget and the adoption of procedures for the capital improvement grant as a result of that budget, we're looking at applying for the capital improvement grant at the state to help fund some HVAC improvements at the high school, electrical and HVAC improvements. So a resolution is to be adopted for the district to go ahead and make that application for that purpose. If you recall, this was the same grant we used for the high school roof repair that was 75% funded by the capital improvement grant. So we look to continue that. We think now, this being the third year, we're back on track to receive it again, potentially. So that's the recommended action for that application. Any questions on the capital improvement grant? Going back to the high school stadium project, which again is funded out of our capital projects fund, out of our general fund, so existing monies. The scoreboard over the stadiums does not work whatsoever. It has been blown over. It has been struck by lightning. It is not functioning. So we bid out the purchase of a new scoreboard and related steel and support. And this is the result that we added in terms of a change order to the total project, looking at $59,000 approximately for that cost. Also with some additional features to make it look a little better than the scoreboard that's out there now.
Mrs. Mulhern.
Thank you. Can I just ask regarding the, I know this sounds very minor compared to the very heavy discussion that we just had, but regarding the scoreboard, as someone who knows very little about scoring sports, since many sports will be using this field at different times, is this scoreboard design that I see, or whatever we end up getting, one that is I guess, multi-sport friendly? I don't know if that's the right wording, but just wanting to make sure that it gives us what all of our different athletes need to have their activities represented correctly up on the board, if that makes sense.
So this will cover most sports. One that covers all sports was a little more expensive, and
I had a feeling.
and one that does it fully and legitimately was very expensive. So
Okay.
We were just trying to do a like one-for-one replacement.
That's fine. Okay.
Fitting into what we had prior.
Okay. But it does meet the needs of the majority of our athletes that will use that. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Mrs. Blitzstein.
Thank you. And maybe I missed this, but have there been any conversations about sponsorship for a scoreboard or conversations with any community entities that might be interested in this, or are we too late in the process to entertain that kind of prospect?
So we put together a sponsorship plan. Our goal was to meet and to gauge interest for those who want to be part of this project. But I wasn't going to take that to the board until there was some solid interest.
Got it. Thank you.
Looks like we're good.
Also next week is a resolution for the Ready to Learn block grant, the tax equity resolution. So we passed one identical in June, if you recall, in the anticipation of this grant being released. The grant ended up being twice of what they allocated it for. So the resolution itself, the resolution itself has to be updated because the dollar amount has changed. So other than that, the purposes for the tax equity grant remain the same: mitigating future tax increases, supplementing the Homestead Act, mitigating and replacing lost revenue as a result of assessment appeals, or reducing debt. So as we discussed last month, we do have some substantial assessment appeals, which are resulting in the reduction of our assessment that this could be, in fact, used immediately for. But as you saw per our calculation, I think we're going to be in a somewhat break-even situation this year. So in my mind, it makes sense to push this towards next year and focus on using it to help balance next year's budget. And the last item for approval is the MCIU member services budget. The member services budget is the smallest part of the IU budget that we approve, and it's for government relations support, technology services they provide the district. It's for professional development they provide to our educational and our support staff. And that total amount is $58,000 or $2,000 more than the prior year. This isn't the whole schedule of services and shared services agreement that gets approved later. That's over $1 million. This is just the minor piece that has to be approved within the next month. And that is the last board agenda item. Any questions on any of the board agenda items presented tonight?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to make a comment, if that's okay. I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Sweigard, for all of your efforts to get us a clean audit. That's no small feat. Sort of, I appreciate all the time and effort that you and your staff have, put into making that be the outcome. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I would like to thank everyone in the business office as well, all the staff that work in the business office, because it really is a team effort, and they work hard to make sure all the bills get paid, all the activities posted in our general ledger, and it's all accurate. That we meet all of our compliance standards, whether it be payroll, IRS, state requirements, state grant requirements, state reporting requirements. So everyone definitely works hard in our office.
Thank you. And it's certainly not a panacea, but today's budget address certainly gives an outline for what is proposed in terms of some state resources. And so folks can certainly start to look at that. This is also what was missing is sort of a call to advocacy. We know the state conversation is the state conversation, but that's also another tool in our toolbox there in terms of advocating at the state level. Wanted to add that. I think if that brings the presentation to a close, I'll do another check. Any members of the public? I do see some folks here. Give another moment. I think the person's not here who had a question earlier. All right. With that, I'll await a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Ross Whiting.
Second, Caroline Watts.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all, and have a good night.